Well, hello and welcome to another episode of today's Conversations on Leadership. I am your host, Dr. Gilles LaMarche. We have a truly special guest today that was referred by one of my great friends, a mutual friend, Mark Victor Hansen. And this young lady is Mitzi Perdue. She's the past president of the 40,000 member American Agri-Women. She's also a former syndicated columnist. For more than 1 decade, she was the most widely syndicated environmental columnist in the United States. Mitzi combines the experience of 3 longtime family businesses. Her late father, Ernest Henderson, was president and co-founder of the Sheraton Hotel Chain, and her late husband, Frank Perdue, was a member of the 2nd generation in the Perdue poultry family that today employs more than 20,000 people. Ms. Perdue will be sharing with us some of their leadership secrets. She's also eager to share new and exciting ways of combating human trafficking. In 2019, she founded Win This Fight, Stop Human Trafficking Now. Mitzi, welcome to today's Conversations on Leadership. I'm so excited to have you with us, and I'm so excited for you to share some of the leadership stories that you learned both from your dad and from your late husband, Frank. So welcome.
Well, I'm just delighted beyond words to be with you, and I'd love to share some of the leadership things that I observed in my life, because how about leadership? It's so important. We need more of it, and I think it can be learned.
And I agree. So yeah, share. I know just before we started recording, you told me that some of your best leadership stories come from your dad and your late husband. So share away and let our audience understand how important leadership really is.
All right. The first story that I'd love to share with everybody has to do with a time that was in its way as difficult as what we're experiencing with the pandemic. And that is in the 1930s, in the middle of the Great Depression, when it was at its worst, unemployment was 25%. And if you lost your job, you probably weren't going to find another. It meant the breadline, meant hunger. Okay, so those were really bad times. But my late father, decided to start his business at the absolute height of the Great Depression. And at the height of the Great Depression, with 25% unemployment, that meant that hotels were one of the worst investments you could make, or so it would seem. I mean, it looked like hotels were a fast one-way ticket to bankruptcy. So how could my father make a success of the Sheraton hotels? And here's how he started. He started with his roommate from college, his brother, and himself, and they bought a hotel it was in Massachusetts. And since he started with, how about no employees, no hotels, and yet at the time of his death, he had 20,000, so I'm trying to say 20,000 employees and 400 hotels. And he started at the worst time that we know of for getting into the hotel business. I, as a kid, was always asking him, how did you do it? And he had a number of different answers to that question, because, there were a number of different things he had to do right. But the one that I'm most eager to share with you, and it just involves pure leadership. He told me that whenever he'd take over a hotel, he'd know that the employees were probably pretty demoralized, because it's normal practice when somebody takes over a company to bring in their own friends, their own nephews, cousins, people that they've had experience with, and to fire other people to get rid of dead wood. Father took a different attitude. He'd invite, when he'd take over a hotel, he'd invite every single person who worked at the hotel to come into the hotel ballroom. And while they were there, again, he knows that he's dealing with a very demoralized bunch. He'd tell them, and the first words out of his mouth would be, I want every one of you to keep your job. And the reason why is because I know you know your job better than anybody else in the whole world. And my job is to give you the resources and the encouragement to show the world just how good you can be, just how good you are. And you'll see in a few months this hotel is going to turn around. It's going to be the most popular hotel in the city. It's going to be an inspiration to others in the city to show that things can turn around. Cool?
Absolutely. I love it because, yeah, true leaders inspire, don't they? That's the goal
Yeah.
of a leader, is to empower and inspire.
Yeah, he used to have a rule, inspire, don't require. But there's a PS to this story. In fact, there are two PSs. PS number one, he told me the words weren't enough. They're good, it's on the right track, but they're not good enough. So he said the next day, the employees would get to see that there would be, just whole groups of like painters, decorators, plumbers, people who would come to refurbish a hotel that had been on the brink of bankruptcy. But what the employees would notice, probably with astonishment, was that all these people who were coming to refurbish the hotel, they were coming to the areas that only the employees would see. Father told me the first money he ever spent on any hotel he ever bought was on like refurbishing and sprucing up the employee dining room, the employee lockers, the employee showers, the corridors. I mean, the first money he ever spent was on areas that the public would never see. So of course I'm asking him why. This doesn't make complete sense to me. Wouldn't you put the money in where you'd be getting your money back from the paying public? And he said, nope. That a leader's job is to give people a better vision of themselves. And if he puts his first money into making life as good as possible, their surroundings good for them, that is a very concrete way of communicating to them how much he valued them. Cool?
The lesson that I received from that was take care of your people and they take care of you and your other people, your customers. What a
Yeah.
concept, right? Take care of your people.
Yeah, I mean, I heard him say possibly a dozen times, possibly a bajillion times, but he used to say, and even wrote it in a book that he wrote, that the success of Sheraton at every level depended on the employees. Because when you inspire people, they'll go the extra mile. They'll stay with you for life. And so, I think he did it because he was a good man, but I think he was very aware that there are just extraordinary benefits to communicating to the people who work with you how important they are. And there's let's see, I've given you one PS to the story. There is another PS to the story. And that is, this is a leadership lesson that, again, I don't think it's well enough known, but it's something that anybody could do. And the story begins like this. I asked him, I'm a little girl at this point, maybe 10 or 12 years old. And I asked him, Daddy, why did you promise everybody that they could keep their job? Why didn't you make them fight for it or earn it somehow? And he said that in his world, there are 3 ways to get people to do what you want. And this is in his world. I mean, imagine there are many others, but in his world, there were 3 major ways. And the first one is intimidation. He said, I could have stood up there in front of everybody and said, shape up or you're fired. And he said, you could probably get people to shape up, but they'd do it grudgingly. They'd do the least that they could do to get by. He said, intimidation in the end is really a bad way to get people to do what you want. And again, to repeat, it's because they'll do it grudgingly. How good is that for you as a manager to have people carry out what you want grudgingly? So he said, number 2, I could have stood up there and I could have told everybody, do a really great job and there's a raise in it for you, or do a really, really good job and there's a bonus in it for you. He said that's bribery. And he said the problem with bribery, there are a number of problems with bribery, but among them, people don't stay bribed. You have to keep upping the ante. And the other thing is, and this was the biggie for him, they work for the bribe rather than for the good of everybody, for the good of the whole enterprise. So if intimidation and bribery are ways that he doesn't recommend for getting people to do what you want, what's left? And he said, inspiration. He said when he was talking with people about that they're part of a team that's going to make this hotel the best in the city, and that we were going to be an inspiration for other people during these dire times. That means, and I'm quoting him now, or at least I'm paraphrasing, but this is what he said. He said, the maid isn't just making beds or cleaning trash, and the bartender isn't just pouring drinks. No, their work has much more meaning from that because they're part of a team that is building together something wonderful, something that everybody can be proud of, something that makes you want to come to work.
There's a quote that I was reading this morning that's very appropriate to what you just said. And it's a John Maxwell quote. And he says, the pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist expects it to change. The leader adjusts the sails.
Oh,
What your father was doing is that he was adjusting the sails at each individual hotel with each group of people so that together they would thrive. And of course, if his people were thriving, then the hotel business was thriving, and therefore his business was thriving.
yeah, I mean, it was totally a payoff deal. He was able to make a success of hotels when, as far as I can tell, this being the 1930s, nobody else was able to turn hotels around and make them spectacular.
And the Sheraton chain is still a very, very popular chain across the United States and around the globe today.
Yeah, and by the way, we did sell it on his death. So I think it was 1968 that we sold it. But we've stayed together as a family, and we still invest together. So the family's still going strong, even though we sold the hotel.
Beautiful, beautiful. And you said you learned a lot of other stories from your late husband and the Perdue poultry family.
Yeah, Frank was, it's kind of surprising to me, but Frank had a story that's a little bit similar to my father's because he started with the Perdue Farms started with his father. His father was a poultryman, raising chickens. When Frank joined him, and we're talking 1940, when Frank dropped out of college because he decided he didn't have an academic bent and he didn't really want to be a teacher. So he went back to work with his father at age 20. And it was supposed to be temporary because he was going to work for his father until he figured out what he really wanted to do in life. And then he did stay for life. But when he started with his father, no employees. By the time of his death, 20,000 employees. And so, like my father, he started with no employees, went to 20,000. But something else that he had in common with my father, he was an absolute believer in, I guess, inspiring the people who worked for him, because Frank and I married in 1988. Frank passed on in 2005. During those 17 years, I got to watch up close and personal how much effort he put into encouraging the people who worked with him. And by the way, he would never say worked for him. They worked with him. And like my father, the people who worked with Frank in general, they stayed with him for life. And when Frank died, I've had people tell me that, well, like one guy was telling me he was driving just somewhere and he heard it in the news and he had to pull over to the side of the road and just bawl because Frank had been such a positive influence in his life. But you mentioned or asked me about stories about Frank and leadership. Well, one of the things that we did, which I'm proud of because I played a role in that, when Frank and I first married in 1988, I, coming from the hospitality industry and thinking that you solve everything by getting people together, I told him, I didn't suggest, I told him that I thought we should entertain every single person who worked for the company in our home for dinner. And his immediate reaction was, that's not practical. We employed 16,000, which we did at the time. And he said, that's just impossible. And I kind of pretended that I didn't really process that he was saying no. And I said, I think we should have them 100 at a time. And he said, no, that's way too many. And I said, let's start with the secretaries or the administrative assistants, because they can tell people that our parties are fun and not scary. And anyway, and I said, I think we could start in 6 weeks. Well, we kept going round and round with me acting as if I wasn't processing that he was saying no. But as we continued to talk, I noticed that his attitude changed to maybe there's something to it. Till finally, at the end, he said, I like it. Let's do it. And I know that it was that he was initially hesitant because, I mean, that sounds as if, it sounds kind of wacko to entertain 16,000 people. But I know that he was always on the lookout for showing the people who worked with him how important they were to him. And this fit. And so 6 weeks later, we did begin having people 100 at a time. And we did start with the administrative assistants. But our goal was to have everybody and would have them in groups who knew each other, because I know perfectly well that if you're maybe you're a trucker or an accountant or who knows what, that it might be a little bit intimidating or uncomfortable to have dinner at the big boss's house. But my reasoning was that if we invite people in groups who know each other, that it's more comfortable. So that's exactly what we did. And at these parties, and here's kind of the leadership lesson, whether you're employing 5 or 20,000. At these dinners, well, the first thing is invite them to your home, because that just means a very great deal to people. I've had people at funerals tell me that the next of kin at the funeral told me that being entertained at the big boss's house was one of the most meaningful things in the deceased's life. Okay, so how about it's important just to begin with. But the second thing is, we had a great big long buffet table set up in the living room.
With some good chicken, I imagine.
Guess what? Yes, we did serve chicken. Frank would wait on his employees. He'd stand behind the buffet table and actually serve his employees. And if his goal was to make people feel important and appreciated, having them to his house and waiting on them, boy, that had to be a pretty big message.
You know what? I love hearing that, and I don't know where I learned that from, but I have done that from my years in practice. I would have my entire team with their spouses over to our home for dinner, during the holiday season. When I came to Life University, I started the same thing, and it just so happens we're recording this today, Monday, and on Friday evening, I had 67 people at our home. I prepared all the food.
Wow.
I did have 2 people helping me serve so I could entertain a little bit at the same time, but we've been doing this since we moved to Georgia. We've been doing this a couple of times a year. So the team that works with me are always invited. Some of the executives at the university obviously are invited. This time we had some volunteers that were attending Life University for a special weekend event for prospective students. And so I hosted them at our home on Friday with my wife, and I hosted them at our home. So I didn't learn this from Frank, but boy, it's so exciting to think. I mean, I've never had 20,000 employees. So I can just imagine the idea that you had to entertain them 100 at a time had to be a huge success, because I've seen what it does to the people that I get an opportunity to work with and to serve with. So what a beautiful lesson that is.
Well, I'm enjoying the fact that great minds think alike.
I like that too.
But I want to describe what the parties were like, because, by the way, he did have people help him serve. He wasn't serving the great buffet line by himself, but he was there behind the table waiting on his employees. But something else that he did that I just thought was so valuable. At the end of the evening, he'd stand up in front of his employees, and actually he was a fairly shy person, so this cost him, but nevertheless he'd do it. He'd tell them what was going on in the company, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the challenges, the victories. And, that must do something fabulous for employee engagement, for them feeling, yeah, we're part of this. And then he'd take questions. And then at the very end of the evening, he'd use different words each time, but it would always be to the effect of, I know the company wouldn't be what it is today without you. Thank you.
Gratitude, right? Gratitude, expressing gratitude, because being a leader is more than providing paychecks for the people that work with you or for you. It really is about inspiring them to be the best that they can be, and therefore helping the company be the best that it can be. So yeah, gratitude plays a long role for sure.
And there was another part. There's a quote from a psychiatrist from somewhere around the year 1900. His name was William James. And he said something that, as far as I can tell, Frank embraced with every cell in his body. And it's the following, the great quote. The deepest principle of human nature is the craving for appreciation.
Mm.
And having people for dinner and waiting on them and sharing how the company's doing, that's just going to be a mammoth way of signaling, hey, I appreciate you. I'm willing to take my time off to do this.
It's a beautiful thing, isn't it? Gratitude has played a very important role in my life. As a matter of fact, I'll stretch here, and I'd be honored to send you one if you'd like to have one. But I've carried a gratitude stone, heart-shaped gratitude stone, in my pocket for probably some 30 years. I was gifted one years and years ago. Initially, it was just a little stone. And then maybe a decade or more ago, a friend of mine, Dr. Joe Dispenza, who I've had on the podcast before, actually gifted me a heart-shaped stone. And when I was in Scottsdale with Mark Victor Hansen, his beautiful wife, Crystal, I gifted them a heart-shaped stone. So the first thing that I consciously, put into my pocket in the morning when I get dressed is my gratitude stone. And through the day, I put my hands in my pockets. That's what guys do. Every time I feel it, I just take that moment. I just stop myself and say, what have I got to be grateful for, like right now? So when we individually focus on gratitude, we have a great ability then to share our gratitude with the people that surround us. So showing appreciation becomes simple because I've got that constant reminder. And often with women, when I gift it to them, I say, it might get lost in the bottom of your purse, and one day you might find it, but you're not going to get to see it every day. So I always suggest that they leave it either on the bathroom counter where they see it early in the morning when they're rising, or maybe leave it at their computer where they're going to see it if they're going to get their computer. But yes.
I would adore to have the gratitude stone because, a quote from Frank. Frank created something that other people have done too, but he created an ethical will. And an ethical will is about leaving those who come after you, not just material goodies, but how about values that will help you have a better life? And I think something like number 6 of his 10 was, if you want to be happy, think what you can do for somebody else. If you want to be miserable, think what's owed to you. And I like that because thinking what's owed to you is the opposite of gratitude.
Absolutely. So do you have a favorite color?
I like purple.
Purple. Okay. Well, I know that Cheryl's got your contact info, so I will put one in the mail to you today.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
It's been a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for sharing some very inspiring stories, because you're talking from truths that you have personally experienced from childhood into your adulthood. Any closing comments for our audience who are really wanting to learn to improve their leadership skills?
Well, one of the ways of improving leadership skills is giving. And I would love you. I'm not asking for money, but I am asking, I would love it if human trafficking is on your radar. Please come to my website, winthisfight.org. I've got some wonderful ways that you could volunteer, or even supposing you don't want to volunteer, I'd love you to sign up for my blog. I think you'll find it fascinating, inspirational, full of things that you can do in this world so that when at the end of your days you look back on your life, you can think, I led a good life. So come join me, winthisfight.org.
Thank you so much, Mitzi. It's been a pleasure to get to know you during this short time together. I know that we're going to get to connect at some point live. When I travel up to Maryland, even if I travel to Maryland to go and visit with you, we're definitely going to get that done. In the meantime, friends, pay attention to the beautiful messages that Mitzi shared today. And if your heart calls you to do so, please do go to her website. We know that human trafficking is a major issue, certainly living in Atlanta, a hub for human trafficking. It is a
Yeah.
big deal. So thank you, Mitzi, for all that you have done and you continue to do for humanity. Just know that we appreciate you for being on this podcast, and I'm sure the world appreciates you just for being Mitzi.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.